introduction about the Internet of Things, and maybe you could you could tell us about what is IoT in theory, and sort of how does it work?
Hello.
Yeah, Ram, am I audible?
I don't know if it's yours or mine, but this kind of the connection is a little shaky. So I don't. If you can hear me, just let me know.
Yeah, I can actually hear you. Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. Firstly, thank you so much for having me here, and I really appreciate it. And I could see lots of young coders and lots of people who are taking interest in learning computer science, learning programs, and also learning programmatic languages to understand and build things. And especially the topic of Internet of Things is like as you rightly pointed out in the introduction itself. Internet of Things is everywhere, right? From your smart gadgets or probably the wearables what you wear on your wrist, that is like your smart watches, so on and so forth. So what is the definition of Internet of Things? To simply put together anything which is connected via internet, where you could get some meaningful information out of it. It could be your smartwatch itself, which is reading some sensory data. That is like there are sensors in that smartwatch which are reading your blood pressure, and then it's sending it over to cloud, and on your app you're able to see that. That just simply defines that is an Internet of Thing. How does it work is it's a complex thing. It depends on what kind of sensor, what kind of device are you using. But to put simply in a very simple words is that you have a bunch of devices or bunch of sensors, and all of them are connected via controller or probably via a processor, what we call them as. And these processors are talking everywhere. It could be talking to your own phone on your app, or it could be talking to the cloud, which means that it is sending data over a cloud, and then you're collecting the data. And all these comes and falls under Internet of Things. Internet of Things is nothing but what if all the objects we know, all the devices what we know, are started talking to each other, and they are also making sense to us. It's just not that they cannot talk; they can talk obviously, and they make sense out of it. And that's exactly what Internet of Things is. And there are lots of things, right? Like the sensory data, the weather information. At this point in time during the day is when the rain starts falling, right? And how could they predict up to that hour or that minute is something coming from weather sensors which are located across the globe and are also on the satellites and all. So that way the collection of all this information and making it more meaningful, and then publishing it across for all the day-to-day usages or probably your own personal usages is what we call as a connected device, and that is where the Internet of Things come into it.
Got it. So, like, if anyone wants to know conceptually, or if they want to build IoT products or IoT services, what are the technologies or concepts that somebody should be aware of?
Uh, so, uh, so as I was just setting the context of just defining what is Internet of Things, there are multiple things. If you see, there is an object, or probably there is a device or a sensor, and what we typically call them as like the sensors or the devices, or in computer terms we call them as firmwares, or those are hardware devices or something which is physical, which is like an object, and it has some amount of information which it captures. It could be the light sensitivity, it could be your pulse sensitivity, which is like a pulse oximeter on your watch, or it could be as simple as sensing when are your vegetables in your fridge getting rotten. So all this depends on the kind of sensor. So if you broadly divide it into, there is something which sits and acts on top of these devices. That is your hardware. It could be your sensors, it could be your hardware devices, chips, so on and so forth. And then there is all that which takes to retrieve the data and then push it to wherever you want, whether it could be apps or web and all. What happens is that when the data is being sent, right, for example, a light sensor is sending you data. It could send in the data in a different format. It could send just like temperature variances and all, but that could not be probably read by someone like human, right? So you need machines to understand what is the data being sent, how is the data being sent at different frequencies or different intervals of time, what we call them as. So your programmatic challenges starts from there, how to read the data and how to understand the data and then just start pushing the data. So if I just look at how to read the data and understand the data, majority of this IoT problems are like you get lots of bytes of information, and all that bytes of information has to be converted into something very, very meaningful. And there are languages like C, C++, Python, even Java. They're quite familiar out there in the market, and all of them have a decent amount of examples online. And that is probably the place where people get started with. That is where you because out of the box they give you solutions which can let you connect to your own device and read the data, and then make some useful information out of it. And that is where typically you get started with. See, there is also other side of it, which I said, right? Like the devices have their own firmware, what we call them as, which is firmware is nothing but a software which runs on some hardware, and it has its own cycles of sensors. So that could be very, very, it could be proprietary also based on who's making the sensors. Like, for example, if an Apple making a chips or sensors, they would not, they would patent it, and they would not let you write something on it, but they could give you some interfaces to write on top of it. So that way, this is how it is divided. So if you know the basics like C, C++, or probably something like a Python or a Java, you might as well get started with it, and you will be able to definitely write something which is meaningful and read the data from there.
Got it. So, I mean, fundamentally, it's all about how there are sensors in the hardware or firmware device, and then streams of data is sent from that thing. And then computer science engineers are mostly working on how to infer that data to basically provide some amount of valuable information, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah,
That's
I think now,
how it is set, right?
yeah, I think also nowadays there's a lot of things like IoT is being clubbed with image processing, IoT is being clubbed with AI, and IoT is being clubbed with a lot of other technologies as well, right?
So IoT is typically what we call them as that. As I said, the breakdown of IoT happens. The collection of data is the biggest thing, right? These sensors, devices send huge amount of information. If I leave a sensor on, like for example, if I leave my heart rate monitor on, it checks my heart rate throughout the day for 24 hours interval. So that's like huge amount of information. And that information, for you to understand, process it, you need technologies, you need probably tools and technologies to collect that data and process the data. And that is where majority of the computer science problems are getting into. You would have heard about artificial intelligence, machine learning, kind of like technologies or tools, and that is where the world is going towards to help IoT get that kind of a stack.